Can you turn your share off until after the introduction and then you can bring it back on? Cool. Yeah. Okay. We are live. Yep. We'll let people filter in. Hello all. Welcome. We'll give it just a minute for people to log on. All right. Well, we'll get started. Welcome to Science on Tap Minocqua Zoom edition. Thanks for coming. My name is Carol Warden. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1909 that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. Our partners for Science on Tap include Minocqua Public Library, the Lakeland Badger chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, and UW Trout Lake Station. Science on Tap is supported by the Brittingham Fund from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And there are 3 ways to watch Science on Tap. Right here on Zoom is the most popular one, where you can use the Q&A to ask questions as we go. And we'll get to that in a moment. You can also watch on YouTube, but YouTube is not interactive, so you can't ask questions through that medium. And both have the links on our website at scienceontapminocqua.org. And finally, you can watch an event later. If you can't make it tonight, you can go to our website and click on Watch Archived Videos. And we also often have an 8 to 10 minute short in that format also. Before we get started, our next event isn't until the far away future. On October 6th, we'll be taking the summer off per our usual to do field work here on station through that time. So come join us again on October 6th and we'll be in touch with that topic as it gets closer. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, can everybody find their chat button? It's on the bottom of your screen, and please use it to let us know from where you are tuning in. So if you just want to type something in there, and we'll take a look. We've got visitors from Crandon, Land O'Lakes, Winchester, Lake Tomahawk, Minocqua, Hollister, Woodruff. Great. Right here in Boulder Junction, where we are. Hazelhurst. Ooh, Chicago, very nice. Lac du Flambeau. All right. Okay, thank you very much for chiming in there. And any tech problems you have during the presentation, you can also use this chat window to let us know in that way. So tonight, we have Heather Birkland to tell us about forest management in Wisconsin. Heather's worked with the DNR since 2000. Her early career was spent in Iron and Ashland counties, managing diverse public lands, tax law program, fire suppression, education and outreach, and private land ownership programs. She worked up the ranks as a team supervisor for the Mercer Mellon team, then the Woodruff area leader, and as deputy division administrator for field operations, and most recently was announced DNR's chief state forester in 2020. Her favorite parts of the job have been the people that she's worked with and the landowners that she's met along the way. She believes in strong partnerships across the industry for the future, and Heather hopes that this session will offer a better understanding of what the Division of Forestry does, why trees are so important for a long-term healthy environment, and how you can do your part for future generations. Heather grew up in the Driftless area of Wisconsin, where her family still owns 120 acres that she enjoys exploring. She has resided in Minocqua since 2002, where you can find her family enjoying the diverse outdoor recreation opportunities for all seasons, making maple syrup, wild ricing, and trying to grow a more productive garden. Good luck. Better luck than I had, I'm sure. Okay, so per tradition, we have a little trivia story for you about Heather. So, one winter, as a field forester, Heather was trying to wrap up her last timber sale before going on leave. After a long, beautiful day spent trekking in the snow, she made her way back to the truck, only to discover she had locked the doors and had no keys. She searched her pockets and vests and secret spots for spares, but nothing was found. This was odd and frustrating because the doors were rarely locked when working remote in the woods. Of course, cell phones were not yet the norm, and her radio to call into dispatch was in the truck. It was then she realized she lost the keys when she stopped to use the bathroom in the woods. Picture many layers of clothing and gear. There was no way she was going to backtrack her snowshoe efforts nor find the keys in several feet of big fluffy snow. So off she hiked 3 miles before coming to a residence who graciously let her use the phone so she could call her coworkers for assistance. So which one of these exacerbated the situation even more? A. This occurred during a record low temperature season. B. She was 9 months pregnant. Or C. A scurry of squirrels chewed through her data sheets by the time she returned to the truck. So, you should see a poll come up on your screen, and you can choose which one of these you think exacerbated the situation even more. Record low temps, 9 months pregnant, or hungry squirrels. And as you vote, we'll compile those results, and we'll share those results in a few minutes before we get to the Q&A part of today's discussion. And you will also use the Q&A question button to ask your questions when we get to that portion of the program. So now, Heather Birkland.
Well, thank you for that, Carol, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. Wish it was an in-person event because I always enjoy these Science on Tap sessions, but glad I can be here virtually. And, you know, my goal is to keep this quite informal. I do have a presentation to give, but I'm looking forward to just having a conversation with you all. And I know, seeing from where everybody was from, I know you already have a passion for forestry in Wisconsin, so that's a great start. And I'll start sharing my screen. Carol, can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Great. So yeah, thanks for that introduction. I do have a love for this area of the state, but I do appreciate the landscape all across Wisconsin and the diversity that we do have. So I was thinking a little bit about what to present on today, and you know, some of you probably have a good background on what forestry is in Wisconsin. So I tried to diversify it a little bit, and going to talk a little bit about what we do, the history, but growing a little bit more than just trees, growing how we've grown in the Division of Forestry and where we're headed. And so hopefully by the end, you can at least take home a few nuggets that you can share with your family and friends and have a greater appreciation for the beautiful woods that we all so enjoy and many of us live in. So like I said, it's good to know where we started from so that we can know where we're headed. I do want to pause and give tribute to the federally recognized tribes that are here in Wisconsin as well, long before the European settlement. So while oftentimes we talk about history of forestry in Wisconsin, starting with primarily the cutover period at the turn of the last century, know that our tribes were here practicing sustainable forestry for many years and living on the land for many years prior to our settlement. But that, over 100 years ago, this is what the landscape looked like. Much of the Northwoods and much of the state was cut over for building infrastructure, for building our cities. And so the misnomer is that the woods we see today has been what it looked like for years and years, when really it's this second growth from that era. And recognizing that although we have 17 million acres of forest, and that's staying pretty steady through time here, the volume that we are growing is nearly twice what we actually harvest per year. So our trees and our forests are getting older across the state. I also like to recognize that many of the programs that we do today started with the foresight of leaders back in that early 1900s after the cutover period, and recognizing the need for reforestation. And some of the lands that became tax delinquent and putting it into public ownership. So that foresight created what we have today here in the conservation efforts in forestry. And you can see the programs that were established over 100 years ago, and many of those programs, actually all of them, we are still doing today. I also like to give a little trivia that the first state nursery was in Trout Lake in Vilas County, and those seeds were planted to start reforestation by 1913. And that's basically what started our nursery program that's still flourishing today and producing more than 1.6 billion seedlings that we use of native seedlings here in Wisconsin. So, my goal here leading the division is to just recognize that strong historical foundation, but also making sure that we're adaptive to the changing landscape around us. So what is it that we are growing besides trees? Partnerships, strong economies, public safety and resource protection, healthy forests, which equal healthy people, and the value that we bring to Wisconsin. I always like to start too with our Division of Forestry's purpose, which I think is very forthtelling. Is our purpose is around partnerships and really working in partnerships to protect and sustainably manage our ecosystems for the ecological, economic, and social benefits for today and into the future. And our culture in the division stands by this, and we know that partnerships are key in order for us to maintain a healthy ecosystem here. So growing partnerships, thinking about who owns our forests, you can kind of see a list here. Who do you think owns the majority of our forest land in Wisconsin? If you said the private landowners, you were correct. That is also sometimes a misconception, is people think that the state or the DNR owns the most land and we're managing the most forest here, but it really is a private landowner. And so very important that they are engaged and understand what forestry is, the benefits that their forests provide. So one of our great initiatives is making sure that we're connecting with landowners. In 2019, we launched Connecting with 20,000 Landowner initiative, and it's really about engaging those landowners that maybe have never connected with a professional before. And so it's getting them to just acknowledge that they have something that they can do with their property, thinking about what objectives they want, not just forest management, but many of why people own land is for wildlife habitat, for beauty. And so making those connections with a professional and talking about ways they can actively engage with their properties. This is a partnership with the Aldo Leopold Foundation and My Wisconsin Woods. So if you want more information on this, just head to mywisconsinwoods.com and you'll learn a lot about opportunity for outreach and to connect with a professional. Our forest tax law program has been very popular and has been around for years as well. Was one of the first, forest crop law was one of the first tax incentive programs, and we do still have some of those on the landscape, slowly expiring. But managed forest law has remained steady and continues to grow with landowner interest. It is one of the programs that gets highly publicity, I should say, and often has legislative touch points along the way. So we're constantly kind of working to adapt to ensure that it continues to meet and add value to landowners across the state. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the tax law program, we do have some updated publications on our website. And you'll see our website throughout the presentation, dnr.wi.gov, and then click in the topic forestry, and that'll take you to lots of different tabs where you can learn about all of our programs. One thing I like to highlight that we're growing is our urban forestry program, and recognizing the value that trees bring to the urban life. And one thing that has really come to fruition and really expanded is urban wood utilization, especially with emerald ash borer coming through. It's brought kind of an increased interest in salvaging urban trees and finding a new life for them, which is really kind of creative and really a neat niche. Our urban forestry staff are scattered amongst some of the larger communities throughout the state, but often manage grants for the communities, working very closely with municipalities and arborists to maintain the health. We see the Urban Wood Coalition as a great partner going into the future, and more opportunities for these kind of creative niches. Obviously, one of the big things that the division does is partnering on our Wisconsin public lands. And county forest is actually the largest public land ownership here in Wisconsin, and we're pretty lucky here to have such a large county forest program that's been around for many, many years. Over 2.4 million acres, and now 30 counties are enrolled in the county forest program. And it's a very close partnership with the DNR. We assist in actively helping them manage, and it does bring much return back to their local economies for the counties and the towns, both in recreation and in timber management. You can see we're in the heart of state forest country as well, 500,000 acres of state forests across the state. Northern Highland American Legion is obviously the biggest, but we have many others, even our southern state forests and the Kettle Moraines. But primarily, the larger of state land ownership is in our parks, our state natural areas, our wildlife areas, and our boat landing fisheries areas at about 1 million acres. Division of Forestry staff work very closely with our fish, wildlife, and parks partners in ensuring that we're kind of in step in how we want to manage those properties as well. Also, Wisconsin's lucky to have the National Forest, Chequamegon-Nicolet, at 1.5 million acres, and then also recognizing our tribal partners as well. On our state lands, we are guided by master plans, and currently we have several master plans in process, looking across ecological landscapes. That's the bottom map. Very soon, we will be queuing up the North Central Forest, which for those of you that live up here in the north may be interested when that master plan process gets underway, which I'm told is sometime yet this year. And there'll be opportunities for public input into that process on aligning how we're managing our lands with public demands as well as landscape needs. Another important partnership is our Good Neighbor Authority. Having the National Forest here in Wisconsin, back in 2014-15, the Farm Bill gave us the opportunity to partner with the Chequamegon-Nicolet in a GNA. And basically it's to work in partnership with them to help them meet some of their accomplishments and goals on their properties and benefiting the greater good for the landscape, forested landscape here in Wisconsin. You can see since the initiation of the program, we have been able to help bring wood to the market, help them catch up with some of their backlog practices that they were having due to just workload and vacancies. And then money goes back into program revenue projects that benefit the greater communities and the landscape, like I said, anything from mowing and brushing projects to cold water stream restoration and other collaborative projects. And so we are still in this agreement and have another agreement for another 10 years. So this program is here to stay, and it's benefited greater Wisconsin communities. Of course, we all like our wildlife, and that's an important partnership with forestry as well. I highlight the grouse because a Young Forest Initiative has been really an important landscape scale project to improve habitat for grouse and woodcock. Also recognizing that forest lands benefit more than 60 other species of wildlife and birds. Super important piece of why we do manage our woods is for wildlife habitat. And we know that, like I said, private woodland owners, their primary benefit for owning land is for the wildlife habitat. And so there's several organizations that are working very closely in trying to maintain aspen on the landscape, especially here in the north, as we are seeing a decline in those young forests, timber types such as aspen. And so finding ways to keep aspen on the landscape, keep the boreal type forest on the landscape so that we can have a diverse wildlife population. Of course, a big partnership is fire suppression, protection, and prevention that we do. We work very closely with our volunteer fire departments across the state. We have protection areas that are in statute that we are to manage and protect the citizens. And then there are other areas that are less prone to fire that are called our cooperative areas. And that's where we partner with fire departments to assist. In addition, we work very closely with our Fish, Wildlife, and Parks partners and Prescribed Burn Council, as well as private entities that do prescribed burning across the state for restoration and habitat. One thing that people often don't know is that we do have a strong aeronautics program, and that too historically began back in the late or 1915. This is actually Jack Vilas in 1915. Up in the air spotting forest fires, working for the Wisconsin Conservation Department. And it is believed that he may be the first use of an airplane for conservation work. And so we still today rely heavily on our pilots to be the eyes in the sky during fire season. They are spotting fires, they are helping guide our staff on the ground during an incident to keep them safe. As well, though, they are a very important partner with our Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and our research. They fly for wolf surveys, many other surveys as well for wildlife, so it's easier to do in the air, as well as super important for windstorm. They fly for forest health across the state and do surveys. This one here was the 2020 storm over Star Lake. I'm going to hit a little bit about where we're growing to forestry growing stronger economies, and recognizing that not only the forest products industry is important, but that forest-based recreation accounts for 5.5 billion per year in Wisconsin's economy. And we all recognize that for those of you that have lived up here a long time, during COVID, many people flocked to public lands, and that opportunity to get out and recreate in our forests is really super important and something that we shouldn't take for granted. And having those lands available for the public and for those that aren't lucky enough to own property. And so recognizing the importance that we have a healthy forested landscape so people can come and recreate from everything from, hunting to cross-country skiing to bird watching to hiking and everything in between. And so we recognize that it can be a difficult balance. We want people to come use our properties to see what beautiful landscapes we have, but also we need to be cautious and care for our surroundings. And then recognize the importance of why we may manage parcels the way we do to make sure that we do have these lands for people to visit for many years to come. And so with that, also recognizing the importance of our forest products industry here in Wisconsin, it is second to our agriculture community. And often it's overshadowed by agriculture, but it's really an important piece of our state's health, with contributing over 24.4 billion annually to our economy, over 63,000 jobs, and recognizing it's the #1 employer in 7 Wisconsin counties, and many of those are in the north that are already kind of suppressed counties because we don't have manufacturing type jobs. And so super important to maintain a healthy forest products industry here in the state. And I like to throw this out there just for everyone to think about, because sometimes we think, oh, we're harvesting everything out there, and really, when you look at the landscape holistically, we are only harvesting roughly 2% of the forested land that's here in Wisconsin. So what may seem like a lot happening in your backyard, when you look at it across the state, it really is minimal and has a huge contributing impact though. So practicing sustainable forestry, which we stand on, and maintaining a healthy forest industry is crucial for the state's economic well-being. But we also recognize as well for the vitality of our forest resource itself and all of the other benefits that come with it, such as clean water. And just recognizing that if we don't have a healthy forest industry in our state, we can take a look at some of the other states across the nation and the impacts that have had on their health. You can see miles and miles of mountains that are completely devastated by budworm. You know, just recognizing that people won't have places, could potentially not have those places to go, increase costs for landowners to manage their property, not being able to sell their wood or do what they want as far as managing for their wildlife or their objectives. It could also lead, to subdividing, fragmentation across the landscape, and then not having the ability to continue to sustainably manage. There's less incentive to address those threats, like I mentioned in forest health. So thinking about where we stand, in Wisconsin, and to build that culture and society that embraces the use of wood in all aspects of our life is super important because it's everywhere. And trees and forests, will build a more sustainable future for all of us. So what else are we growing? Public safety and resource protection. And I'm going to hit a few more slides here just because we are in the heart of fire season. As we may recognize, it's still, even though we get a little bit of rain, it's still our driest season, and in our heart of the fire season, like I said, is spring here in Wisconsin. After the snow melts, all the dead wood, but prior to things greening up. And so we have an obligation to protect human life, property, and natural resources from wildfire. We average about 1,500 wildfires a year on average, about 3,000 acres. That doesn't always account for the cooperative area that I showed prior on the map. And fires, thankfully, have stayed pretty small here in Wisconsin, but it doesn't mean that we aren't susceptible for larger fires. So bad news is 98% of Wisconsin wildfires are caused by people, still loving to do their debris burning. And so just recognizing the time of year you are burning, just be safe and get a permit and check conditions. But also the good news is these could be prevented. So we continue to have that robust prevention program. You can go to our website and check on burning restrictions. It looks like a map like this, and you can click on your county and it'll tell you what the conditions are, if you need a permit, if you are going to burn, what the burning hours are. And then also recognizing you can do your part, thinking about your landscape and where your property is and how you may provide some defensible space. We love our houses here in the Northwoods. We love trees. but often building right next to trees and thinking about the trees that are surrounding you and how fire prone they are. So just cleaning that out around your house, as well as thinking about access into your properties, and if a fire truck needed to get down there, how could they? So urban interface is a huge part of the work we do as well, and we have staff that are dedicated to helping and work with communities and fire departments on such activities for home ignition. I also want to hit a little bit on trends in Wisconsin, because I often get, especially with the on-site slot of Western fires increasing, and often we get, well, is Wisconsin fire prone like California? And on a good note, we are not. The Great Lakes obviously differ in vegetation. We have different density types of trees growing here, different weather patterns and topography, unlike some of the Western states. And so our seasonal differences as well, like I said, our season is pretty short in the spring. If we get a drought in, drought conditions in the summer, we can obviously get more fires here too. But theirs primarily comes later in the year, as they've have longer drying seasons. And then our causes, our human cause, we're often out west in the western, they're from lightning. And again, recognizing that we're not out of catastrophic wildfires. In 2013, we had the German Road fire in northwest Wisconsin, which burned over 7,000 acres and did consume several structures. And so it's important to recognize that even if we're here in the Great Lakes, fire can be devastating. We do send staff, though. We do partner with our Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact, and that's Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Ontario, and Manitoba. So we have an agreement to share resources if conditions arise and request is there for the need. We also send staff for Western support. And last year, even in some COVID conditions, we were able to mobilize 60 staff, which can be upward as to over 100 that we would send. And really, it's a value added, great experience, training to bring back to the state, and offers different perspectives here. All right, so moving kind of forward and thinking about some of the other initiatives that we work on and that we're growing here, and thinking about healthy forests and healthy people. And this is the urban tree canopy over Minocqua, and just recognizing that there's research that's occurring linking trees and human health, especially in that urban landscape. And our urban forestry staff will be leading a study for the Northeast Midwest area of the United States, and it's a multi-year study by a federal grant that's going to be looking at kind of the urban and community forestry industry and kind of the impacts on human health. So it's a really exciting study and should be completed sometime in early 2022. But even though we recognize trees are good and they benefit our health, reduce our stress, protect watersheds, provide wildlife habitat, we do have increasing threats that we are obviously extending a lot more energy resources to, and one of them is invasive species. We are lucky to be partnering with cooperative invasive species management areas across the state. And I have the link there if you're interested. There are several here locally, I believe, just north of here, there's one, or a cooperative in this area. And they are doing primarily working with communities to help kind of mitigate and eradicate where they can some invasives. We're not out of the water, though. Anybody who travels to the south knows that it's just slowly coming further and further north. And so recognizing where we want to put our energy into combating invasives is an important piece to strategize. Obviously, you can help avoid moving firewood and avoid, just recognizing times of year to prune or harvest to kind of mitigate the risk of such things as like oak wilt, and then recognizing emerald ash borer again continues to spread across the state. And you can check out our forest health link on our website has just a ton of materials specifically to the pests, common pests here in Wisconsin, and also will link you to our forest health specialists. We have several forest health specialists scattered across the state that can also answer and help with any of your pest questions. Forest regeneration monitoring is something that's fairly new, although in our federal forest inventories has been kind of assessing regeneration for several years, a decade. This program just got up and started about 3 years ago in Wisconsin, and it was one of the kind of requests and work with the Natural Resources Board and our CDEX in kind of getting a better handle on deer and deer browse here in the state. And just recognizing that we just finished our first 3-year cycle. So we just had that data put out. And so it's really the foundation. And so until we've gotten more plots now in the next few years, we won't be able to really assess trends and where we're at. But really looking at the regeneration on our forest floor across a variety of stands and timber types, and just being able to use this data as a tool for the CDEX and for our wildlife biologists to make decisions on deer populations and managing deer. And like I said, nursery and reforestation program has been around a long time. And so while we used to have many nurseries scattered across the state, we are down to 3 state nurseries, and one is really the active one where we are still producing and distributing primarily our seedlings, and that's down in Basketball. A banner year for seedling orders, over 4.3 million. And so for the public, you can go on our nursery website, and see what kind of seedlings we still have left in stock, and you can still get your order in if you're interested. But again, we also do native seed collection, and we are growing native species here, but we are also looking at what climate means and some southern species that might be able to adapt here in Wisconsin, and exploring those options for climate adaptation. You know, in growing, thinking about the value of our forests and trees for Wisconsin, and thinking that just this is a good statistic that more than 10 million acres of our 17 million acres has a focus that includes protection of soil and water resources. So it's not always about just producing a forest product. It's all the other benefits that come with it. And just recognizing that we have and we are trying to actively, sustainably, and healthily manage our woods. We are leading the nation in implementing our third-party forest certification standards. We have over 7.5 million acres of forest land in Wisconsin that is certified. And there still is quite a demand from the public internationally for certified wood, and still a very important piece that we have certified wood going to the mills. And so speaking of climate, and one of the things that obviously is growing awareness here in Wisconsin and across the globe, recognizing that the governor has a task force on climate change and had a report, and the DNR just released our climate blueprint as well, where we've prioritized climate initiatives within the department. And then also our Division of Forestry, we have a climate team that works very closely with WICI and identifying forestry related initiatives and focus here going forward, and how we can address, mitigate, and adapt, and also complement many of the practices that we are already doing and already have been doing, recognizing, but maybe influencing or increasing such actions here going forward. Just highlighting, many of you know the climate impacts on our forests, but these are just a few to recognize that you know, we don't necessarily see these overnight, but through time, you know, we're going to have longer growing seasons, which could increase stress from pests, diseases, non-native species, less winter snowfall. So it's much harder to get in and do active management if you don't have that frozen ground. Potential risk for wildfire and potential risk of losing some of our stands or forest types that we historically had, such as our boreal forests and our paper perch decline. Just highlighting one of the governor's initiatives that just got launched, and that was the Trillion Tree Pledge. And this really is a partnership with all of the communities and the partners in the forestry industry across the state, and really joining in a global trillion tree movement. The governor sits on the National Stakeholder Council, and so we're lucky to have that representation nationally, but really thinking about how to educate and just leverage tree planting and the importance of trees across Wisconsin. And so this initiative is very robust. 75 million trees planted in Wisconsin, both rural and urban, by 2030. So hopefully you'll get out and do your part and find a plot of land or plant a tree in your backyard and just here we are growing Wisconsin's trees one tree at a time. And you can make a difference. You can learn more about it here, and we're going to be offering up some additional information about what the program means, and who's all partnering and how you can continue to contribute towards that effort. One thing though that's consistent and important to recognize too in the whole climate initiatives is maintaining working forests, minimizing that fragmentation and conversion of forest land to non-forest uses. And that's one of the good programs that we've had is conservation easement program here in the state, both through the federal forest legacy program and then the state Knowles Nelson stewardship program. And being able to kind of conserve large blocks of land, keep it in forests, for years to come has been an important asset. This is one thing that's been brought up again in the budget for many of you who are following it to reinvigorate this fund again. As we're winding down, I just want to recognize that the Division of Forestry has a statewide forest action plan. This is a 10-year plan that is required from the federal government and to receive grants, and then just recognizing those that have a division or a state forestry program. And this was a robust process where we engaged many partners and to make sure that we are aligned with the direction that our partners and that our community and that our state is headed in the goals of where we want to go in several forestry initiatives and programs. You can type in Forest Action Plan and you can go to any of the topics that interest you. We've kind of split it out into categories to make it more user friendly so that you don't have to read the entire book. And so that just went into effect in 2020. So that's kind of the overarching statewide plan, recognizing the Division of Forestry's niche amongst the greater forestry community. We also have a Division of Forestry strategic direction, and that's a 5-year plan. So we use the State Forest Action Plan to kind of guide us, but then this is really focused in on where we're going to spend our resources, our time and energy to make sure that we are offering the services that the public wants to the greatest good. And we will actually be just starting to launch or take a deeper dive into our next strategic direction, which will go into effect next July. Lastly, to wind down, one of the topics that are growing and important to many of us in not only the natural resources profession, but in all professions is recognizing workforce development and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thinking about the future of our programs, the future of conservation, getting people excited about wanting to have a career in natural resources. The one on my left is an apprenticeship program, which is actually the first program of its kind in the nation. And that was through urban forestry and industry working with local governments to have a registered arborist apprenticeship program and getting people engaged as arborists here in the state. And then also just improving on our youth outreach efforts, partnering with many entities to educate, get people excited, like I said. And forestry in itself has some challenges. We are one of the natural resources professional that probably is declining in interest. And so even diversifying the profession is just it's gonna be that much more challenging, but we're up for it because it's important that we have future foresters and we have future conservationists. So as I close, again, just recognizing, Aldo Leopold theme was connecting people to the land. And making sure that that connection stays, because obviously when you connect to the land, you can appreciate it more. And that as we become less dependent on the land, it's easier for us to kind of forget how the land evolves and what it needs to be cared and tended for the future. And so if you understand how forestry evolves and what is needed, you can better support efforts going forward. And this one I bring up too, because this was a foresight in the 1920s by a 4-H leader here in Wisconsin, and really recognizing after the cutover period, the need to get youth involved, the need to get people connected back to the land and start healing the land. And so reclaiming that cutover, planting trees. And then basically it also led to the start of our school forest programs. And so having that foresight, getting people excited about natural resources and about forestry is what we need. And we need you to continue to be our advocates. So I'm excited. We're growing a bright future here in Wisconsin with our forests and our forest landscape. And just recognizing that we are caring and we're carefully managing and closely monitoring more than we ever have here in history. And just recognize, forests help build Wisconsin, and they'll continue to serve both social, ecological, and the economic backbone here and for our state's well-being. So thank you. Thank you for your interest in forestry. Thank you for your continued support, because the trees are growing and hopefully you're growing with them.
Thanks, Heather.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, we'll get to questions here in a second, which will take some time to answer. Before we get to the questions, let's find out our trivia answer. So, the overwhelming majority was not fooled. Indeed, Heather was 9 months pregnant when she locked her keys in the truck on a snowy afternoon. So, it wouldn't be Science on Tap without the questions from the audience, so we're relying on you to send those in. You can find your Q&A button, again, at the bottom of your screen. And this is where you can write your questions. And a few of us here will be monitoring those questions, and I will ask the speaker those questions as they come in. So, the first question we have is, deer densities have exceeded what traditionally have been considered silviculture thresholds in many northern counties. The County Deer Advisory Committee process seems more subjective, opinion-based, program-dominated by local hunting interests. Is there a DNR plan to restore scientific deer management since the deer trustees changes were imposed after 2014?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we know deer are definitely passion here in Wisconsin, and can be controversial. And, we're hoping, obviously, like I said, with this snapshot of data that's setting the foundation, will help as we go forward. Obviously, it's not enough information right now to make, sound scientific connections here, but we're hoping that this data as we go through will show more scientific evidence, using it to make those decisions. But this piece of the data is only one piece that gets fed into those discussions and those decisions. And so we need to recognize too the social piece of deer here in Wisconsin, and it can be a tough balance, and just recognizing to find the tools that we'll be able to make the best decisions and to make sure that we do have regeneration. But you do bring up important points that we need to continue to keep a pulse on and continue to advocate for.
Another question we have, are you concerned about maintaining MFL certification in the face of burgeoning deer densities in Wisconsin farmland woodlots?
That is something that we do are looking into, and seeing that compatibility with forest certification, and what that means. Also recognizing that we may need more tools, more funding to help landowners in those efforts, to ensure that we do have regeneration. And so, yeah, it definitely is a topic that we are continuing to discuss and take a deeper dive in.
All right, thanks. We have another question coming in. And one second, sorry. The current governor recognizes the threat of climate change, but the previous one did not to mention the legislature. How does the forestry department deal with that change in government?
Yeah, I think we recognize as public employees that legislators and people are driving, or what we are, what we have to kind of abide by. And so legislation that comes, we have to be adaptive while trying to still balance what we know as sustainable management, as conservationists. But I think there's a lot more opportunities, even with that changing legislation, for us to still do good and offer benefits. So, but it can be a challenge if it fluctuates, from one extreme to the next. So we just try and do our best to manage with what we can within our legislative guidelines.
Someone writes, recently I visited a friend selling carbon credits for his forest. Is this a practice that is becoming more widespread? Can you elaborate on the mechanisms of this program?
Yes, that's carbon, and carbon credits seems to be the topic of the hour, and is very much in the forefront. I could tell you that it's becoming more popular across the nation as there are more entities that are getting into the carbon exchange and the carbon markets. Here in Wisconsin, there are some entities I know, larger woodland owners, that have entered into those carbon markets. There is currently a couple research projects that are happening. One that we're hoping to have data here soon in the summer, that's looking at our public lands and the capacity we have here within the state on how much carbon is even held within our forested landscape. And then also there's another program that's happening across northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan that's taking a look at private lands, and then potentially what types of practices would be eligible or compatible with the carbon market. So a lot happening right now. Some states are trying some piloted programs on their state lands to see what that may entail. We here in Wisconsin are still kind of exploring what that looks like and what our options are, but I think you'll definitely continue to hear more about it in the near future.
Thanks. Okay. Someone writes, there are only a few very small areas in the Northern Highlands American Legion Forest in central Vilas County that are designated in the master plan as Managed Old Growth Restoration Zone. Recently, a timber harvest plan on one of these designated areas was in the late planning stages and was to be very heavily harvested, removing the overstory in about 100-acre area, including harvesting large oak and also white pine up to 40 inches in diameter. With intervention, the timber harvest plan was modified. Are there any safeguards in place to be sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, we recognize that we need to engage public landowners or private landowners along our state properties, and there's that balance, recognizing that we do have a public input process when we are looking to establish a timber sale, and so getting that input up front. However, we do recognize that people may move into an area after a sale's been established and may not have that same input into that process. So finding ways that we can better engage with landowners that are near a timber sale, we're definitely we're working on that piece of it. Also with the master plan process, as amendments come, or potentially we are going to be revisiting our master plans, that's another opportunity for the public to weigh in on the broader landscape scale on these properties, and making sure that objectives from the public are also input into those plans as well. And so, it is a balance. Our state forests are, like I said, working forests, and we do have legislation in place that requires us to actively manage. And plus, we want to make sure that we are continuing to sustainably manage to have that healthy landscape. But it definitely is a balance in recognizing those that live amongst a state forest where is a lot of cutting. It can be tough. And so having those conversations will continue.
Okay. Oak forests are critical for wildlife, carbon storage, and forest products. Typically, shelter woods largely led to stands dominated by red maple stump sprouts due to inadequate investment in timber stand improvement. Are there ways to prioritize TSI funding to better maintain the resource?
I like that idea. Yeah, we recognize that oak across the state and the landscape is old. It's getting older, and that it requires more aggressive practices in order to regenerate it, unlike some of our other species. And so it takes a lot of energy to get an oak stand back. Plus, like we know, a lot of wildlife like the acorns, and so recognizing that, and so. Yeah, having grants and programs in place that we can look towards those types of practices to help landowners to take a little bit more aggressive action to make sure oak is there it's good, and it's something that we'll continue to look at too. The Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program, I know in the latest budget was up for potentially increasing funds, and that one is a big program that we offer private landowners in the state for various timber stand improvement practices.
Okay. What do you suggest to women who are interested in forestry in a career that's typically dominated by men?
Yeah, well, I'm glad there's interest, but it can be a tough profession. But there are so many good people out there, so many staff, landowners, industry partners that I've met along the way that they don't care, if you're female or male, they just are excited to work with you. So it's really about your attitude and what you can bring to a profession, and how you go about navigating. But I think it's important that we recognize that there is that lack of diversity in forestry and in this profession, and just acknowledging that there may be some extra struggles and challenges, and being able to support our women in this profession. But glad to see, and if you ever want to talk to me about I think I've seen quite a bit and had to work through quite a bit through my career, but it's been good, and I've met a lot of great women along the way too. Mm-hmm.
Great. One person says, "Is it my imagination, or are the fallen leaves on the forest floor not decaying over the winter like they used to? Leaf litter seems much thicker than it was 10 or so years ago. Walking through the woods in the past, I rarely wound up in leaves over my ankles like I do now."
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting phenomenon that I don't know if I can answer, but I'm going to look into that. But I know what you're observing because I've seen it too, but I wouldn't be able to tell you offhand exactly what's happening.
I wonder wonder if it's related to earthworms. I
It
have no
could
idea.
be. And just soil nutrient, just
Sure.
the environment we're in may not be decaying as quickly. Yeah, lots of factors could be in play.
Can you comment on the impact of the closing of the Verso, Wisconsin Rapids Mill? The Verso, Wisconsin
Yeah,
Rapids Mill.
yeah, I'm glad someone brought that up. Obviously, when mills as big as Verso, which accounted for about 25% of um, wood going to that mill, would have an impact, especially locally in that area of the state. And so we've been in lots of consultation with our industry partners and just recognizing the impacts to the markets. It has impacted somewhat, like private landowners being able to do some active harvesting. We've made some adjustments to our contracts, our timber sale contracts, especially in that area, offering up extensions, hoping that maybe the market will rebound. Markets, obviously ebb and flow. And so other parts of the state, and depending on the timber, they're still doing great and robust, but definitely something that we continue to have conversations and keep a pulse on.
All right. Any idea what will bring the lumber prices back to normal?
Yeah, here in Wisconsin, a lot of the lumber that we use is actually Western or Southern wood, or in Canada. And so often not directly tied to the conditions here, but more globally. And so, supply and demand, and then recognizing kind of the international trade, tariffs, all that kind of trickle down effect. But I agree, now would not be the time I would want to be building a house.
Yeah, or even fixing something.
Yeah.
Okay. Although this was not part of your talk, could you discuss fungal networks below the forest floors? What value do they represent for a healthy forest? How does logging help or hinder these networks?
Good question. I can't remember the name of a book, and maybe someone can help me. But that it was all about studying the fungal relationships, and like how amazing and intricate and widespread. They've done some studies on some of them,
Mm-hmm.
and it is fascinating under the soil what all happens. And it just, I'm not an expert, so I can't tell you all the details, but I do know that oftentimes we forget that piece of the puzzle of of how trees grow, and that important component is the soil. And so practices that maintain, just that healthy, the healthy landscape, healthy soil, will, obviously increase and keep a healthy fungal system. And then thinking about, trees and regenerating trees and keeping native trees, so that we continue to have that network underground and above ground. But yeah,
Someone suggests it might be called Finding the Mother Tree.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Excellent. If you haven't read it, it's good.
Yeah. Okay. Harvesting in the Northern Highlands American Legion forests along lake shores appears to be more aggressive in the past few years. I've seen timber harvest within 60 feet of the shoreline and heard of others even closer. In order to protect the watershed and maintain the riparian diversity, wouldn't it be reasonable to have a substantial buffer zone surrounding our lakes and rivers?
We do have our Wisconsin best management practices for water quality that addresses various lakeshore riparian zones. And it can vary based on the types of trees that are there, the type of lakeshore that's there, the type of terrain. And so thinking about all of that as we're setting up a timber sale to go into effect, and just recognizing that, yeah, buffers are important, and we want to make sure that we are protecting water quality and runoff. But it can be variable, and we can still maintain a healthy watershed, following those guidelines that have been in place for several decades and have included input from many scientists and partners that fed into that.
Thanks. Locally, there's concerns about overstory removals that came within 30 to 40 feet of Trout Lake when the minimum standard is a 100-foot buffer of evenly distributed trees, at least 60 basal area. Similar concerns exist at Whitney, Upper Gresham, and Jute Lakes. As the new state forester, would you come out to Trout, Upper Gresham, and Whitney to see this evidence?
You know, it's interesting that well, one, I've lived near here, and so many of these places I recreate in already, and so it's not out of the ordinary that you could find me paddling along a lake shore that is being harvested or hiking right through it, and so it's not uncommon that even in this position that I could, you know, it's really a balance too, as the state forester, in recognizing statewide needs and looking holistically at how things are managed, and having that balance across the state. So yeah, you can find me all over the state, but I also have to balance all the other kind of workload, policy guidance that gets thrown our way as well. Mm-hmm.
How are jack pine stands managed since they need periodic fire?
Yeah, good question. The other mechanism is to kind of mimic that fire disturbance as well. And, you know, so clear cutting, so basically it needs to be completely cut so that it has kind of more of that extreme light and heat to the soil, scarifying. And then we are doing and seeing quite a bit on some of the county forests in the Northwest part of the state, doing a lot of direct aerial seeding as well. So just inundating with a lot of seeds so that the viability, or you'll increase some sort of some regeneration with jack pine. But jack pine, you know, I think sometimes gets a bad rap. Like people think it's kind of an ugly tree, or you know, just because it requires full regeneration, so clear cut. But it really is a beneficial tree to many wildlife and birds.
Do you ever still use a Biltmore stick for field measurements? Did I say that right? Biltmore.
Mhm.
Biltmore.
Yes, I do, if I go out in the woods. Which
Was
becomes
that,
rarer and rarer in a position like this.
I was going to say, was that in your hand when your keys were in the car? Or was that in the truck too?
Um,
Um, Someone says, our property has a lot of jack pines. They're breaking and dying each year. What type of tree would you replace them with?
You know, that's always a hard one because I don't know exactly where your property is and what are the other conditions. But knowing that jack pine likes, you know, the drier soil, sandier soil, you know, another, or a red pine probably does well. I don't know if you're looking for a hardwood type alternative. Uh, you know, some of your oaks, but obviously we want to watch for the critters to eat those, so you'll have to protect those. But just offhand, that those would be some recommendations. A spruce do all right too. Mm-hmm.
Are crop trees still planted in straight lines? And if so, why?
Interesting. So my first image of a crop tree is different than what you were describing. And so I'm thinking you're thinking of like plantation rows, which some people would equate to like agriculture, forestry, so crop trees, like you were saying. And that was a common practice when we needed to reforest those large swaths back in the cutover era. And so the easiest is to go through and plant in rows. And so many, depending on the species, so like your red pine, still gets planted that way. It's much easier to manage and maintain. You know, it requires periodic thinnings, and then eventually you get to a point where there are scattered trees left, and you can either replant or you can diversify and plant different. But we still, you know, industry still does rely on those types of plantations in certain parts of the state. So you'll see it's still a very common practice, like in the central part of the state.
Okay. In northeast Wisconsin, we have oak wilt, and red oaks are not very resistant. More resistant white and swamp oak could be prioritized for planting. Any programs that concentrate on planting oaks?
Yeah, we do have like a white oak initiative actually down in the Driftless area, and that's a national initiative to try and get white oak back on the landscape because we have been losing it. Um, and because it does offer those benefits that you are saying, and it isn't as susceptible to oak wilt. And we have seen that swamp white oak is actually doing quite well and kind of migrating further north. And so that is a species that could do better north than historically. And so encouraging those plantings, we do have those trees growing in our nurseries. So landowners can order them through our nurseries. So that's where I would start.
We have someone asking, what is a certified forest?
So forest certification is that third-party certification. Basically, there's a set of standards and an auditing team that looks at if you are certified, you get audited and you have to meet those certain standards. Everything from making sure that you're following through on the practices that you say you're doing, the guidance that you have. And so looking at holistically at how you manage your lands. So considering not only the forest resource, but the other benefits that come with it, such as the water quality, soil protection. And so certification has been around for several decades and continues to be a popular demand for society.
We have one last question. I'd also just like to thank everybody that did send them in, and I know we didn't get to all of them tonight, but we do the best we can in the limited time that we have. So thank you for sending all those in to all of you. Our last question is, do you have a favorite old growth or new growth forest patch that you recommend visiting?
Oh, well, there are so many across the state. You know, anytime I can get to like a hemlock hardwood stand, there's what is it, the Valais hemlock natural area.
Van Vliet?
Yeah, Van Vliet. That one I enjoy, but I'm partial to hemlock hardwoods. The history, the majesticness of it, and so that's where I usually gravitate towards.
I love the hemlocks too. The grouse will be fine. Okay, well, thank you so much, Heather, for joining us, and thanks to everyone who participated with sending in questions and taking our poll. Thanks to the Lakeland Badger chapter of the Alumni Association, the Monaco Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, and UW Trout Station and Brittingham Fund for putting this all together. And remember, our next Science on Tap will come in October, and we will be in touch about that topic and location. We'll see where we are in the world at that time. If you want to sign up for email reminders, you can go to our website, scienceontapmonaco.org, and click on Contact Us.